Happy Pride Month! Queens Public Library continues its ongoing commitment to promote queer liberation and representation across our borough and beyond. We will be highlighting LGBTQ+ titles, including banned books, sharing knowledge and stories through our programming, and so much more. Everyone is welcome at Queens Public Library, and we are here for you. For more information, visit queenslib.org/pride22. Summer reading kicks off this month. Visit summerreading.queenslibrary.org for our full summer reading program schedule, book lists for all ages, and other resources to keep your kids engaged and learning all summer long. Juneteenth celebrates the end of slavery in the United States. Check out our reading lists and join us for in-person and virtual programs to learn more about this important day in U.S. history. Visit our website for more information. The best way to fight book banning is to read banned books. We are joining forces with Brooklyn Public Library and the New York Public Library to take a stand against censorship with the NYC Banned Books Challenge. 10 banned or challenged books that expert librarians recommend New Yorkers borrow and read. Visit our website to learn more.
Hi, welcome to Queens Public Library's talk with Brian Alessandro and Tom Cardamone, the editors of Fever Spores, the queer reclamation of William S. Burroughs. Of Fever Spores, Kath Koja says, Fever Spores is a cornucopia, a total feast for the Burroughs student, fan, newcomer too. Enjoy and be satisfied by this queer writer like none other. Bravo to Alessandro and Cardamone. Jonathan Cowett, whose name I may be pronouncing, calls Fever Spores a beautiful, retro-futuristic, timely, prophetic, mindful read that travels outside any kind of expired oral history, which I think is true. All of those adjectives apply. And Matthew Spector, whoever he is, says of this that Brian Alessandro and Tom Cardamone's exhilarating Fever Spores, the queer reclamation of William S. Burroughs, takes the already refractory genius of William S. Burroughs and strains it through the prism of dozens of other geniuses, thereby restoring to us one of the most necessary writers of the 20th century. I'm Matthew Spector. I guess that's who Matthew Spector is. I'm the author of, most recently, of a memoir called Always Crashing in the Same Car and of the novel American Dream Machine. My writing has appeared in a bunch of the usual and a few of the unusual places, the New York Times, the Harris Review, and so on. Founding editor of the Los Angeles Review of Books. And I am probably like everybody who's tuning into this program, feeling a bit pissed off and disheartened today, maybe more than a bit. But this would seem to be a nice tonic, a nice transgressive tonic for a truly ugly right-wing day. Culture Connection, curated by Daniel Zaleski and now in its 9th year at the Queens Public Library, is proud to present international artists from emerging talent to award-winning masters. These disciplines include music, theater, author talks, and film. Now expanding into a virtual format, Cultural Connection is currently reaching a global audience. Sorry, Culture Connection. All right. By way of getting us started, I don't know if either of you guys noticed this, but recently, a 1992 Gay Times interview with David Cronenberg made the rounds on social media. Did any of you guys see this? Because it was a really unusual interview in that the interview was about Naked Lunch. And the interviewer goes really, really, really hard at Cronenberg in a good faith way. Like it's just not to take us off topic, but it was strange to read it and think like, wow, this is like pre-internet Isaac Chotiner. Like it's not going for points. It's not trying to like gotcha, but it was really pushing Cronenberg for he felt kind of straining the queerness out of Burroughs in the movie. Yeah, I actually, just for fun's sake, I'm going to drop the link to that essay in the.
Well, that's great. Yeah, like I'd love to read it. Of course, Matthew, I interviewed Cronenberg for this book. He said that when he was writing the screenplay, when he was adapting it, he felt as though he was channeling Burroughs, and that he actually had the opportunity to spend time with Burroughs while they were scouting locations and.
Yeah, I actually I thought I had the link handy. I don't. I'll dig it up later in the chat so as not to derail us. But it's a fascinating, and like I said, ultimately I think Cronenberg's answers are not defensive. They're very, and he kind of goes into how closely he worked with Burroughs. But it struck me as a really fascinating document to come across, as I was already starting to think about this conversation, and it brought me back to my own teenage, in the interview, Cronenberg basically asserts that the sexuality in Naked Lunch is so extreme that it's almost sort of post-gay or post-queer in some way. The interviewer says otherwise, but it took me back to thinking about my own teenage encounters with William Burroughs. My first encounters with him, where I was maybe 16, 17, reading Naked Lunch, becoming aware of the cut-up method through David Bowie and through Cabaret Voltaire and people like Laurie Anderson, where he was, guesting on her records, and realizing at the time that I was reading him maybe as a beat writer, as a drug writer, as an experimental writer, and as a queer writer. I mean, you certainly can't read Burroughs without some consciousness of sort of polymorphic sexuality that's involved. But I was not reading him, when I was reading, say, John Raichi or James Baldwin or Juna Barnes or whatever, I was thinking, well, these are queer writers, and Burroughs did not slot into that for me. So I want to ask, just because it is sort of the book's central project, what does it mean to each of you guys to reclaim him as a queer writer? What is it that you feel has gotten lost or been at risk at being lost, and what is it about that made you want to pull this project into being now?
So Tom, why don't you take that first, because you're the one who came to me with the idea of the project in this fall of 2020 after I published your essay about Burroughs in my journal in the summer of 2020, The Arrested Evolution of William S. Burroughs.
Well, I would say the project grew out of the fact that after I submitted my essay, you said, "Can I call you via text?" Mm-hmm. Which to me was like a big alarm. Like, oh fuck, he hates it. I've got to change everything. There's so many errors. He doesn't want to put them in an email. So I took the call somewhat like nervous, and then you were telling me your own queer experience with Burroughs, which was completely different than mine. Mm-hmm. And I thought, well, this is a conversation that's not happening, that should be happening, because this is the third book that I've edited. The second one, or I should say the third book that I've edited, the second one that was nonfiction with queer characters, mm-hmm. Or queer content, and talking about the scope and history of gay books with multitudes of gay authors. Burroughs was never name checked. Mm-hmm. And I mean, we're talking, 150 years of literature, and he remains outside of our canon. And I just, after, 2 decades, this just hit me like, oh, that's something to write about.
Oh, yeah.
And I think that's where we started to pick up speed.
And to your point, Matthew, he had been co-opted in a sense on some level by, like the drug addiction literature enthusiasts, the science fiction, fantasy, surrealists, literature enthusiasts, and the gay literature enthusiasts seem to have allowed him to fall away. And on some level, maybe it's because, Tom and I decided that queerness was central to both his persona and also his work. Yeah. But we also spoke about Tom, that he had such a countercultural, anti-establishment sensibility that he was always pushing against the authorities. That, pushing against heteronormativity was just part and parcel with that.
Right.
It was incidental almost on some level that he also happened to be gay, but he was always intensely a radical, right?
Yeah.
The Queer is the most radical book because there's no shame, there's no invisibility.
Right.
He's looking to get laid, score. It's oddly hilarious. And if you read the queer text that came out at the same time, these are very tentative identities. There's a lot of, real world pain that they're cloaked in. And he just kind of like kicked in the saloon doors and ordered a shot.
Yeah, and it's worth saying that book was written in the 50s but not published until the 80s. So I really wonder. Yeah, I wonder, if it had been published in the 50s, how it would have changed his trajectory and how we understand him and how we embrace him and how he would have been inducted into the gay literary canon.
Right. That's a fascinating question. And well, I'll come to this later because I think, the 80s was, discovering Burroughs in the 80s, I had like my sense of his work's chronology was completely, it's complicated anyway, I think.
Yeah.
So in kind of trying to understand him in a chronological sense, one struggles. Tom, you kick this book off. There's so many like angles and refractions in this book. I mean, part of what makes it such a joy to read is how many different kinds of response there are, right? I mean, it's a really, really pleasurable book to go through for that reason. I mean, it's even as sort of specific as the lens that this book is interrogating Burroughs or focusing Burroughs through, it somehow just manages to make Burroughs also seem even more, multifaceted and amazing. But
cubistic is the adjective I always use for it, Matt. It is a very cubistic.
Yeah. It's the right one, I think. But Tom, you kind of kick the book off. Your introduction has this indelible description of reading him, poolside in Florida in this kind of queasy, you're describing the heat and the cigarettes and the heterosexual relationship you were in at the time, and it's so vivid and intense, and beautiful as a piece of recollection, I think. But in it, you also say this. You say the most likely reason that Burroughs is not habitually referenced as a founding member of modern gay letters is that his gay book has yet to be compiled. And you start with that, and you sort of talk about how and I think this kind of goes to the point you were just making about Queer being published decades after it was written. You say, how much of literature counteracts repression, serves as a declaration of the right to exist, or provides an elegiac record of existence under such repression, where Burroughs exists, thinks, creates fully outside this diametrical opposition. William S. Burroughs was a writer who accidentally killed his wife, more on that later, spent decades addicted to heroin, was an expatriate, and was more involved with Scientology than his acolytes would care to admit, all while generating reams of writing that not only smashed the strictures of fiction, but influenced generations of writers. Forget coming out. With William S. Burroughs, there's no negotiation, no need for acceptance, for escape, for forgiveness or reconciliation. He wanted us to advance, wholly, willfully, with immortal intent. That is an incredibly sharp paragraph, and it seems both maybe to speak to that Cronenberg interview I was talking about. Cronenberg's exact words were, quote, in the interview, where the sexuality in Naked Lunch is beyond gay. In fact, it's beyond heterosexuality into a kind of alien sexuality. I mean, one can again, that feels like a kind of problematic answer in its own right. But I'm interested if does that seem true to you? I mean, in any way.
Well, it's interesting because when you were talking about the piece that I wrote in the 90s, and Burroughs Cronenberg being interviewed in the 90s, I grew up reading science fiction, and at some point when you read science fiction for a long time and you read a lot of it, that you realize some of it is hard science fiction that is literally advocating for serious change, cultural change and political change. And that's only 1 to 3% of it. The rest of it is, interesting ideas and entertaining. So you kind of grow out of it. And so growing out of science fiction and then entering Burroughs's world and then discovering my own sexuality, I was recognizing that these are all political acts.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's interesting that he's so entertaining while making very sharp, almost lethal political points.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's true. I mean, that's the one thing that definitely ripples through this book, and that I am reminded of in reading this book, is just how hilarious he was.
Yeah.
It's really, and what for all of his other kind of difficult or kind of sometimes very naughty with a K, like, gnarled textual qualities, he's hilarious.
Yeah. Yeah. Very mischievously so, and sardonically, and he was a satirist, right? I mean, he was kind of on some level maybe our Swift. I don't know.
Yeah, totally. That's a good way to. Of course. Yeah,
I think so. And that voice, oh my God! Once you hear his fucking voice, the books are completely different.
Yeah.
Yes. Well, actually, I'll come to that a little later, because I think that the question of him as a spoken word artist, which was, he was almost, weirdly ubiquitous in the 90s in that way. And I was always kind of finding him on, buying those, what were they called? The Jono systems, there were those records that, would include him and Lydia Lunch, or, Sonic Youth.
Yeah,
exactly. One thing that I think is also kind of amazing about this book is that it takes off from Burroughs. You'll interview Samuel Delany or Fran Lebowitz, someone who doesn't even seem to like Burroughs very much. Which I really think is great. I mean, both because the book, there's nothing hagiographic in this book at all. There's no apologies for him. There's no sense of, it's wonderful when you realize, like, even a writer who doesn't necessarily like him somehow has to deal with him. Right?
Oh, yeah.
It's like his kind of influence inside the culture and his power, far more than any. I mean, it's kind of remarkable when you look over your shoulder and you think of the Beats, who were sort of like ostensibly a bigger deal, right? Kerouac or whoever it was at the time. Right. And it's just like those writers aren't remotely interesting. Even I mean, as great as Ginsberg is when he's great, even Ginsberg doesn't get anywhere near the kind of extensive command and the sort of fragmentary influence throughout the culture that Burroughs has had.
Yeah, I agree with that.
So you were going to say?
Well, I was just going to say, and because when you look at the Beats, Burroughs is the one who got better.
Right. Yeah, that's a good point.
Sure. That's true. And really endured and had a I think a richer life in posterity. But and to your point, Matthew, we were really Tom and I were very careful to not turn this into a hagiographic or hagiographic. Sure. Even Chris Stoddard, one of our contributors, almost rejects the entire thesis of the book. Essay. And Fran Lebowitz, she really derides a lot of what Burroughs did.
I know. I kind of love that.
Yeah, same.
Yeah, and I'm not. I mean, I'm much more interested in Burroughs than I am in Fran Lebowitz particularly, but I do love that interview with her. And I think the Delany interview is wonderful too, and it's only sort of almost peripherally about Burroughs. It's certainly about a lot of other
sex life more than anything else. Yeah. It's very rich sex life. But we had would-be contributors who told us flat out that they didn't want to contribute to the book because of the situation with his wife Joan Vollmer, who he had accidentally killed in the 50s. And I said, but you know what? Write about that then.
Right.
Yeah.
Excoriate him. We'll publish it. Fine. But they shied away.
That's interesting.
Brian, do you think they were scared of trolls?
Probably. I think we're in such a troll culture. I think cancel culture scares the hell out of everybody, and they're afraid of misstepping, even if their heart's in the right place, and even if they are criticizing the thing that could get them canceled. They just want no associations with it.
Sure. Yeah. Well, I'll come back to that as well, because I think that crops up later in the book. Did you guys ever think about Dennis Cooper? I felt like that was the one person where I was like, boy, that's
You should have.
I was
Yeah.
kind of shocked not to see him. I was like, of
I
all the
know. I know.
Sounds-
Yeah, we kicked ourselves. And who? Chris Kelso. You interviewed Chris Kelso, the Scottish writer. Tom.
He was
He's-
great.
He's in the book. He knows Cooper, I think.
Yeah.
Right? Or he.
Yeah, I didn't even think I should have asked him.
We'll do a sequel. We'll turn it into a trilogy.
Because Chris gave me
Of course.
Chris gave me William Gibson's email, and he was just really busy with another project because I thought he would have been really neat to go in that
Yeah.
science fiction area.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, again, there's a million people one could have asked. I just like for some reason I was looking at it, my wife was looking at it, we said together like, "Where's Dennis Cooper?" You know, so one thing that also kind of seems to live abundantly throughout this book is the number of people. There are certainly people in here who come to him late or who interact with him very late in his life, but over and over and over, there are people in here describing revelatory encounters with Burroughs they had as a teenager, right?
Mhm.
Or as a kind of young man, young woman, and I sort of thought, beyond the sort of obvious, which is that you're a teenager, you're discovering sexuality. Like, is there something in Burroughs that like really invites, that is, what is the quality in him that invites readers of that age?
Tom, if I can go first, I think it's his sort of punk rock sensibility. I think he really does, and I think it's what I said earlier, that he has that countercultural, anti-establishment soul, and he's very mistrustful of authority figures and very critical of power, and is very subversive and transgressive, and sort of doesn't wear it on his sleeve. He's just very matter of fact about it. He doesn't like try to be cool or approximate coolness. He just is. And he's cool not because he's aloof or indifferent, but I think because he knows what's up and he's accepted it, and I think he understands that we've all been sort of programmed, or that they are trying, the state or corporations are trying to program us, and he's like, well, this is it, like this is the reality, so stew in it.
Yeah.
Don't run from it, don't deny it, face it.
Yeah, it's an unusual, I mean, when I think about the, transgressive writers, because that's definitely what drew me to him, right? Was, it's sort of like, oh, I knew he was transgressive and kind of punk. For me, it was like but I think back about other writers that I was reading at that age, like, Hunter Thompson or something, who also struck me as kind of punk. And, I'm sort of like, I have no interest in revisiting Hunter Thompson particularly. I think that that there's something about Burroughs that is available to to readers, or that is inviting to a reader of that age, but that, it's an appeal that doesn't fade with time. It's not, as you just said it, not itself an adolescent kind of writing.
I think, Matt, also it's that there's a certain denseness of ambiguity in his writing that makes it eternal, because it's not like he's ever putting his finger on like a specific thing that can then be dated or become a time capsule. It's there's something eternal and cosmic and endless, but also really veiled about what he's doing. So it could just it'll always feel like it's current or relevant, because it could always be applied like to the current situation and serve as almost a Rorschach.
I think that's right too. I mean, it's, certainly the kind of power structures that he was interrogating, and the social structures are again, as I think I kind of was pointing towards at the beginning of this conversation, they're they haven't alleviated, and they haven't really changed.
Sadly, we saw it today.
And we only find the challenges to those structures in music, or we did in the 80s and 90s. Literature at the time was mostly entertainment. It probably is right now. But whoa, the punk that was coming out of the 80s was just absolutely fucking right on. And there were very few books that you could, you could read while listening to Bad Brains,
Yeah. That's true. That's true. That would capture that sensibility. That's true. There really wasn't much. There are so many different. The other thing that this book reminded me, not that I needed reminding, but that there are so many different Burroughs. The Burroughs of junkie or queer is not the same Burroughs as Naked Lunch or The Soft Machine or Cities of the Red Night, and all of those things are represented in this book. But if you guys, we'll take this question for each of you, each in turn. If you guys were going to point people to one particular Burroughs text other than Naked Lunch, say, right? Because everybody knows Naked Lunch. Where would each of you what do you guys have? Where would you propose a reader to go?
Tom, you go first.
That's tough because I ended up asking Kelso in the interview, what was your second Burroughs book? Because so many people start with Naked Lunch, but the decision to continue is so interesting, because a lot of people, they have a shelf of transgressive literature and that's it, then other people dive all the way in. And I would tell somebody to start with the Place of Dead Roads trilogy, or City of Red Nights trilogy, I guess is the right title. Because to me, that was just seamless. I don't even think you need to read them in order. It was just a wild ride that you can take as an adult. And that's why I do think he got better. I think he really.
Yeah. What's the era of those books?
Those were late. They were
late,
right?
Yeah. That was his last major work, I believe.
Yeah. That's what I thought. Yeah.
It was 80. Cities of the Red Night itself was 81. If you asked me this question like maybe 10 or 15 years ago, I'd probably say junkie or queer. But in the interim, I now would say either Wild Boys or Cities of the Red Night, because they're just so exhilarating, and really they really grab you and they challenge you in such a way that I can't really think of any other recent, and by recent I mean within the last 50 to 75 years, a text that does to me what those two books did to me when I read them.
Yeah, that's a selfish question for me, because I reread Naked Lunch a couple of years ago and it was amazing and delightful. But I think when I was a teenager, I went from there to junkie. I went to the ones that seemed like, oh, maybe this is going to be a little less hard, and a little less kind of exploding, and it was equally so, but in a different way. And I think I did read Cities of the Red Night in high school, but I like these tips, and I intend to clutch them to heart.
When I asked Cronenberg if he had the opportunity to direct another or to adapt another Burroughs book, he said it probably would be Cities of the Red Night. I would love to see that.
Amazing. Yeah. God. Well, that's a whole separate culture connection, which we were talking about. The dream of unmade Cronenberg movies.
Oh, God.
There are many that I still yearn for in my. We mentioned him as a spoken word artist, and there is a nice kind of piece in this book. I can't quite remember off the top of my head which one, because there's so many, but there's a piece. Yeah, Giorno Poetry Systems. That's what they, right? I think I remember buying You're the Guy I Want to Share My Money With, and I can't remember if that was before or after I read Naked Lunch, probably right around the same time. But what is the, obviously the voice. But I'm just wondering if there are other qualities in his work that lend themselves particularly to that medium, because somehow you can sometimes encounter it on the page and find it kind of dense in places, and yet when you hear him reading it, you're just it just makes perfect sense.
I think he has that staccato junkie rap down. and it is a thing, and you still hear it in New York, and it's like an unearthed subculture that he brought forward. Were you going in the same place, Brian, or did you have something else?
No, I was just gonna say there was like there's a quality of like a primal growl to his voice that I think reaches people in their core when they hear it. And I'm looking for the part in the Tony Kushner interview where he actually tried to imitate. He did a really good job of imitating Burroughs, which is unfortunately something you can capture in text. But he did try. He did do a really wonderful impersonation for me when we spoke.
Yeah,
and John Giorno's his estate just moved into the bunker and reopened a event space.
Oh, amazing. Yeah, I think that there is something to what you just said about the sort of primal growling quality, but I wonder too about just the the deadpan quality of it, because I feel like it's the humor that really that it's like whatever he reads is somehow hilarious.
Yes.
Yeah,
naturally funny. Like it's not. It doesn't feel like a put on. It's just it's natural.
Yeah. Since this question did come up about people who maybe might have been a little bit reluctant to participate in this because they were afraid of being canceled. One thing, there are of course pieces in this book about him shooting his wife. There's Dennis Leroy Kangelly says in his piece, he writes, "I could not see past Burroughs' obsession with guns and shooting. I still find it incredible that even after killing his wife, Joan Vollmer, that's a typo, right?
Yeah,
still obsessed with aspects of violent expressions that were purely between him and the weapon, the rat-a-tat Uzi of writing, his stream of consciousness imaginings that actually made sense, and his passionate reverence for the symbols of Americana guns. There is no way in hell that in 2020 there could exist a celebrated living author and thinker who gravitated towards guns and had such a casually violent past as William S. Burroughs. Especially an LGBTQ writer, a moniker he would have detested. He didn't want understanding. He may have sought justice and gave warnings, but Burroughs was not a queer obsessed with acceptance at all. This was a man dressed in a suit, somehow looking like an eternal salesman from the 50s to a defrocked priest from some hamlet festering behind God's back."
It's so good.
An amazing description, but also, set me to wondering, why hasn't anyone canceled Burroughs? I mean, I have my own ideas about that, but I'm just curious if you have opinions about that.
Yeah, I mean, Tom, did you want to start or shall I?
You go.
I think there's a lot to it. And I was talking with Laura Schleifer, who's another one of our contributors, a really marvelous writer. And she said, I think we need to be really fiercely non-binary about it. We have to kind of approach it from multiple standpoints.
Right.
On the one hand, there are those people who say, they were all drunk, they were all stoned, they were playing with guns. Of course, something disastrous was going to happen.
Right.
Then there were those who were saying, well, he was a closeted gay man in the 50s. So let's blame society and toxic masculinity for creating this frustration and anger in him. And perhaps maybe on some unconscious level, he wanted to kill her so that he could be free. Right. Why can't it be all of those things? Why can't it just be a very complex soup of multiple socio-biological, psychological issues at play with one another? And let it be that without just sort of throwing it all away. Like, why can't we just have an intellectual discussion and dissection about the whole thing? Right, with all the contexts, rather than just dismiss it outrightly, which is my general problem with cancel culture. We need to confront, not run. I think for me, cancel culture is about running,
right,
rather than confronting.
Right.
I don't think that bad people should get off. There should be a reckoning always,
sure.
But we have to have the reckoning, and it can't just be elimination,
right,
without discussion.
Right.
Tom.
And so I think that's where the thesis of the book comes into play, because I would say that he's already been canceled by queer culture.
That's true.
He represents a genuine threat to heterosexuality, and we are politically, except for the beautiful edges, generally a group of people that are looking to appease our enemies. We just want to be loved. We're so fucking cute and useful. That, you know, he's the major threat to that reality that we're trying to weave.
Yeah.
He's
Tom,
from the canon.
Yeah, Matt, I have to say this one thing. So I was interviewed by Interview Magazine a few weeks ago. The article is going to run next week. It's about this book.
Yeah.
And I was sort of, talking about how I didn't want to come across as an ingrate. That as a gay man in 2022, I appreciate things like marriage equality. I appreciate the fact that I can live a bourgeois, heteronormative life in a house in suburban New Jersey. These are things that, my forebears weren't really able to do in an out and proud kind of way. So I don't want to seem ungrateful.
Right.
Because what we saw today with Roe versus Wade being overturned,
Right.
Clarence Thomas saying that now we need to start talking about marriage equality. So, maybe in a couple of months that will be overturned as well. So I don't want to take anything for granted because everything is still really precarious.
Mm-hmm.
But to Tom's point, and Tom, you said this 2 weeks ago on the podcast that we were both on, where, I said, we think that we finally got invited to the party, so we want to be on our best behavior and continue to be accepted. And then you reminded me, you underlined the words "we think," meaning that we haven't actually really been accepted. We haven't actually really been invited to the party.
We're here to set the table and clean up afterwards.
Gestures. Yeah.
And it just strikes me that as Dennis points out in his piece that I just quoted from, he wasn't interested in acceptance, right?
Oh,
I mean, what you just said at the beginning of when I asked you the question about, cancellation. I think you have to reckon with, you have to reckon with an artist's work, right? Which is good or bad, independent of whether or not the person who makes it is, a particularly deformed person, or not. I don't want to, give Roman Polanski any medals or any prizes, but I'm not going to stop myself from watching Chinatown, right? Or whatever. And I think, but I do think that there, and so obviously, Burroughs and Joan Vollmer's death is a pretty hard thing to sort of reckon with when you're dealing with the man. But the work, needs to be contended with for what it is, and also for what it was, for what it means and what it meant, in the context of the formation of multiple canons. But my thought was, truly, this is a writer that was, in every possible way in their work positions himself as, positions the moral center of the art exists outside the law, and outside prevailing cultural norms, and I think that has something to do with why people don't motion to cancel him more than they do.
I think that's fair.
And I guess we can be grateful for that.
Yes.
One of the more gratifying and delightful things inside this book is the kind of conduit that runs between Burroughs and Punk. Debbie Harry and Chris Stein participate here. Legs McNeil participate here. And there's something, I think it's in the piece about Legs McNeil that I particularly like as well, which is oddly about Mailer, about Norman Mailer. You quote, let's see, it's from a Legs McNeil's Spin interview. On the interview, it says, with the interviews between McNeil and Burroughs, right? So Norman Mailer said I might be possessed by genius. Burroughs started catching me off guard. Well, that's the point. You don't possess it. And I found myself thinking about the relationship between Mailer or between, kind of like these kind of more mainstream writers and Burroughs, or how I think, Mailer was like a pretend outlaw, right? On some level there, there's even that collection of his essays, Mind of an Outlaw. And he was sort of all that kind of like, white 50s hipster thing that runs through Mailer. And just how it strikes me that, that even the kind of mainstream culture, because Mailer was also as mainstream as it got, right?
Yeah.
Mr. National Book Award, Mr. Potential Mayor of New York City. And to think about, the idea that Burroughs was necessary, like, that the closest Mailer ever came to being a real outlaw was complimenting William S. Burroughs on his
Well, yeah, that's great. I mean, was it Leroy? Was Dennis Leroy Kengele last night at the book launch who said, that he's a black radical writer and filmmaker, and he said that it was really queer men in particular who gave him permission to feel as radical as he wants to be, and he cited like Genet, Pasolini, and Burroughs, of course, and Baldwin, even.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, and I think that too goes back to my own, and even as a, as a straight 15 or 16-year-old, for me, it was always the gay writers that I was drawing, a kind of more muted form of permission, or, even there, it's interesting to think that I was looking at Burroughs or Warhol or Bowie, who of course was also kind of appropriating gay culture, as probably as much as he was living it. But it's, there was that sense that gay culture was at that time, mainstream, even for clueless straight people like myself.
You mentioned Bowie, and didn't Ziggy Stardust and the Spiders from Mars come from Burroughs? It came from Naked Lunch, right? So Steely Dan, heavy metal. The term heavy metal came from Soft Machine. The
number of bands that took their names and sometimes their methodologies from Burroughs is extraordinary. Again, his close relationship with Deborah Harry and Chris Stein comes into play, I think, in this book a bit.
Patti Smith, of course.
Patti Smith. Yeah, exactly.
We tried to get her. She was not available.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That would have been great.
Yeah.
Yeah. The other thing that I think is kind of amazing about this book, and particularly amazing in light of its explicit project, is that, that project seems to lead people to very different conclusions, right? You ask Tony Kushner why he isn't quite part of the gay canon, and Kushner says, well, maybe he's a little too far out, right? And then you ask Justin Adeo, and he says, this I think is Justin, who is also not himself not a gay writer. He says, I am straight, not gay. Gay men, however, have always been among my most revered literary and artistic heroes. This is kind of what I think I was just getting at. Besides Burroughs, Jean Genet comes in at the top of the list, John Waters and Pasolini in film, Rimbaud, Arthur Wilde, Basho, the list goes on. However, I almost feel that the point is somewhat moot. Yes, Burroughs was a gay man in a society institutionally hostile to homosexuals, but the fundamental insight one gleans from reading him is that all sexuality is queer sexuality. That is, in the original sense of the word, of being strange or odd. Is this the genesis of that famous Kurt Cobain lyric? We aren't simply alienated from our sexuality because of societal repression. Again, that there are aspects of that answer that make me a little bit uncomfortable, because it feels like it's sort of, again, a straight person sanitizing queer culture. But I know that's not how it's intended at all, and that's not how I read it. I read it too as a sort of very a sort of accurate reading. But you do get a lot of people arriving at almost diametrically opposite impressions of why William Burroughs has eluded, or eludes capture as a gay writer, or has been viewed outside that framework.
Yeah, and that's what we want. It's a meditation, but also hopefully it engenders conversation, right? That's what we also wanted, was to start a discussion.
Yeah. I think about there's also a piece in here that I think contends well with his. There's an essay that's explicitly about shooting, about the death of Joan Vollmer, and I'm just looking for a quote, another quote that I wanted to tease out here. If you'll just give me one moment. Oh yeah, there it is. One sec. This comes from Gregory Woods's piece. He says Burroughs is not interested in gay identity or gay politics, and I think as much as the other problem spot that seems to loom for me in thinking about Burroughs now is not just Joan Vollmer, but his own homophobia, which is part of it. Even if in a book like Queer, that it seems quite free of that. What he says is that still seems a question that looms in his work, and maybe it's a sort of subset of his work is related to Cronenberg's in being a kind of body horror in spots, right? I mean, it's about as full of viscera and about as full of kind of disgust and self-disgust and as can possibly be imagined. But Gregory Woods writes, Burroughs is not interested in gay identity or gay politics. He is not even interested in the symbolic bedrock of gay liberationism, gay love. Quote, I think what we call love is a fraud perpetrated by the female sex, and that the point of sexual relations between men is nothing that we would call love, but rather what we might call recognition, which is a kind of fascinating quote in all kinds of ways. Like, it's just as cubist as you say cubistic. That quote alone is pretty cubistic.
Yes.
Like Genet, he despises the bourgeoisification of desire, queerness declining into gayness, the domesticated gay couple, lasting relationships, cushions and drapes. And it's it strikes me that that maybe there's a kind of paradox that just like pulses at the center of this book, which is that that his value as a gay writer rests upon his unwillingness to be domesticated into a gay writer, right? He won't be. It's not Baldwin. It's not Forster. It's he won't fit into that framework.
He won't behave.
Yeah, or any framework really. That's the kind of beauty of it, is that the framework of him as an experimental writer. Well, he's too enjoyable to be an experimental writer, right? The framework of him to be a beat writer. Well, he's too meticulous to be a beat writer. It's everything about him seems to, but particularly that resisting of what he calls the bourgeoisification of desire.
Yeah, and I think something else that's exciting about Burroughs is that even among outlaws, or the marginalized, he's even more outlaw than the outlaws. He always seems to be the most sort of extreme of whatever group you put him in, and he doesn't seem to really coalesce into the group, even if it's a marginalized.
I forget whose essay has a quote from him where he even challenges Ted Morgan's title. He said, to call me an outlaw implies that I had a home to begin with. He said it much eloquently, but I was just like, yeah, wow. He even resisted that.
Yeah, amazing. That's exactly, and that is really quite. I mean, I think that kind of sums it up better than anything. This book winds up, in a sense, coming full circle, Brian, with an essay. It begins with Tom, with your writing about your discovery of Burroughs, and then Brian, it concludes with a beautiful piece about your own encounter with Burroughs in Morocco. Again, an event that predates you reading him. You say in it that you read him about 10 years before you came out. That you found in him, a kind of inner zone, right? A kind of a space far outside the space in which you yourself were yet willing to venture. And it made me think now, about the ongoing utility or the need for that. The whole question of a transgressive space suddenly feels like it's that's a very slippery
Yeah, I mean, I think that kind of got at what I was saying earlier when I mentioned that I'd spoken with Interview, and it was about how I, I I never really got a chance to know what that was like, because when I came of age as a gay man,
Yeah.
late, 28, the world was already starting to commodify
Yeah.
homosexuality, which
Yeah.
means that people were starting to accept it, and it was becoming normalized, and my own lifestyle was becoming, as an out gay man, very comfortable
Yeah.
and safer. Tom made the good point that it's never actually safe to be an out gay person,
Right.
whether it's 2022 or it's 2005 when I came out, or 1995 when I was in Morocco, or in the 1950s, right, when Burroughs shot and killed his wife.
Right.
Um,
Where we now seem to be living again today.
yeah. Oh yeah.
Right.
Yep.
Yeah.
So-
I mean, that's a thing. Again, I won't drag this off course, but in thinking about that whole concept of a transgressive space,
Mhm.
I had a big fight with my dad recently, because he was saying something about Dave Chappelle, and we need comedians to push the envelope, and I was like, Dad, making a transphobic joke isn't pushing the envelope; that's being the envelope.
Right.
Um,
Thank you.
you know,
Yeah. Yeah.
and I mean, he didn't. He's 90 years old. He's a good dude. He's not a Fox News dude at all. He just
Yeah.
doesn't fully understand that specific situation.
I think you hit the nail on the head. I think a lot of people don't quite understand transgression anymore. I
Right.
think we've lost that concept. That art, it's an art.
Yeah, but it's a very tricky thing to negotiate now, because what the whole notion of a transgressive space has sort of been, that space has been reclaimed by the right. I mean, we need a different word for
Which
it, because
is fascinating to me that happened.
Yeah.
What
Yeah.
a flight of hand, my God, right? That they were able to pull that off.
Right.
Uh,
Right. Yeah, and it just seems the scariest, and so I guess the question that's kind of forming out of this is, obviously what a writer like Burroughs creates, and I feel like a transgressive space is transgressive against, against things that repress LGBTQ people, and transgressive against things like the Supreme Court, transgressive against those currents in society, which is, where do how do we find a space like that now, and what can Burroughs specifically provide in that world, if that makes sense.
yeah, I think Burroughs would probably say, start with yourself and end there.
Yeah.
It's, don't look for a community necessarily. Be your own community. Be the community you need for yourself, and
I think a lot of his books are manuals to evolve.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
That's a nice way to put it. On that note, maybe we can open up to any questions from the audience, if we would like to.
Matt, while we wait for questions to come in, do you mind if I quickly read the names of all the contributors?
Yes, please do. Please do.
There's Tom Cardamone, of course, and me. There's Samuel R. Delaney, Paul Russell, Jerry Roscoe, Edmund White, Fran Lebowitz, Trevor Healy, Christopher Stoddard, Tim Young, Jason Napoli Brooks, Peter Dubé, Charlie Vasquez, Jerry Wheeler, Legs McNeil, Jessica Rauschendahl, Dennis Leroy Kangley, Laura Schleifer, Tony Kushner, James Grauerholz, Nandi La Sofia, Giannis Papos, Zan Price, J. Daniel Stone, Justin Adeo, David Cronenberg, Debbie Harry, Chris Stein, Sam Desmond, Michael Carroll, Gregory Woods, Sven Davison. That's it.
Great. It's such an amazing. I mean, it's a wonderful list of contributors, and I really have to say, in all honesty, some of those are writers whose work I was already familiar with, or artists, and others were people whose work I was not yet familiar with. But every piece in the book I found to be, revelatory in some way, or interesting, and just so entertaining to read. I think one of the blurbs, I can't remember who, said something to the effect of, Burroughs is more fun to read about than he is to read. And while I dispute that very much, it's tremendously fun to read about. So,
It was Christopher Brown, the author of Gotham Monsters.
yeah.
That's great blurb. We're very grateful for all the blurbers.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you named all the blurbers in the beginning, so that was great. And Garrett Conley also, Boy Erased, gave us a nice blurb.
Yeah. Do we have anybody who wants to ask any questions from the audience here?
They were all out protesting. They were all.
I would not blame anybody for that. On the contrary,
they're all going to watch this later. They're protesting right now.
Lord, it's really what
and I support it. Yes, for sure.
Yeah. Because I'm out of material.
Yeah, no, I guess that's good then.
Yeah.
We exhausted it.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, what can I tell you? This book is really, I had such a good time reading it when you first sent it to me to blurb, and an even better time rereading it. It just gave me a chance to luxuriate in all the various perspectives that it has to offer, and more than anything, to be kind of returned to. I forget who it is in there again, but there's somebody who sort of talks about how many of Burroughs' phrases and sentences have just entered the wider cultural lexicon, and the everything from no glot clum fly day, or how memorable his. And I do find this sometimes with writers who are as kind of stylistically sui generis. I reread Ulysses recently and was kind of shocked, which I hadn't done in 20 years, and I was shocked at how well I remembered it. Like specifically, it just felt like, oh, I read this yesterday. And there are so many sort of much more linear books that you would think would be more more kind of easier to retain in their specifics that I don't retain at all. Samantha Cole, one of our viewers, would like to know, what do you think Burroughs would have made of today's social media / mediated landscape? A great question, by the way.
Yeah. Well, it makes me think of Laura Schleifer's essay, which is about the word virus, right? And how ideas and words can travel like a virus. And I think that Burroughs would have really marveled at, the sort of the speed at which ideas and language can be spread like a contagion.
Yeah. Yeah.
World.
Yeah.
I would have written some very thoughtful books or essays had he been around to see this.
He would have said, "I told you so."
I told you so. Yep.
Well, of that, I'm sure he would have. I also get the feeling, again, it's sort of a mug's game to sort of think like, what social media platforms would such and such dead author use?
Yeah.
But it's pretty easy to imagine him, him having a sort of Twitter feed that would be, kind of as cryptic as Drill's, and yet, but infinitely more strange and upsetting.
Yeah, talk about like cut up, right? He would really be able to fragment his ideas and thoughts and juxtapose them.
Yeah. His tweets would be devastating.
Yeah, they would.
and something that for me really, proved his artistry is somebody online, and it was really a labor of love, collected all of his blurbs. He blurbed a lot of books over a long time.
Oh, no kidding. Yeah.
And fascinating because they were all very astute synopses and clever observations. And so he was stepping out of the quote unquote character.
Yeah, that's fascinating. I would love to see those.
Yeah. I'm super jealous.
Yeah. Great. Yeah. Well, that's a good question, I think, to end us on as well, because it just speaks to what an incredibly modern and contemporary feeling writer he remains.
It's truly time.
And it's all the more astonishing when you think of who his peers are, because I think that all of his peers and his original peers, his beat peers or his 50s peers, not who weren't necessarily his artistic peers, those writers feel very of the period, and Burroughs feels like someone we're still chasing down.
Yes, absolutely. Good observation. Thank you so much for this, Matthew.
Yeah. Thank you guys for coming. Should we drop a link as to the best place to acquire this wonderful volume? Hang on, let me just.
I think it's probably gonna appear pretty soon in the private Oh, there we go.
There it is.
Rebel.
Hey. Yeah. Can't recommend that highly enough to everybody who's watching. It is really It's just a fantastic book, and it will reinvigorate it will both entertain you in its own right and reinvigorate your interest in Burroughs, who's just the best.
Well, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you so much,
guys,
Matthew.
Yeah, my pleasure. You guys have been great. Okay.
Good night, everyone.
Bye.
Take care.
Take-
Thank